Hi and welcome to this video that will be a cross between showing some technique that I will use to try and make my old Flanies map come to life in 3 dimensions finally, and also to show a little bit of the everyday work you have to go through in order to do this. So what we see here is the Lendore Isles. The Lendore Isle, well, there's a number of small islands too. There's a debate on whether how many of these should actually be there, but that's not for today's story. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to uh, mask off the oceans because I want to create masks, and what I mean by masks is this black and whites, meaning the oceans are white and the land mass will be black. And masks are something that is used extensively in World Machine, View, TerraGen, and a whole bunch of other software. You import masks and Photoshop. This is Photoshop that I'm doing this in. That you use masks in order to tell where something should be and where something shouldn't be, and that something can be almost anything. It can be elevation, it can be textures, it can be a color, it can be any sort of transformation, whatever. So in this case I'm going to create a mask that tells future endeavors with this Lendore Isle where I want ocean and where I want land, and I will create another mask for rivers, lakes, etc., and forests probably too. But in this case I'm actually going to sit and so we're going to zoom in here, and I'm simply going to click on the mask here, and then I just paint in. I just use a black and white brush and I just paint in white, and that means that I paint over the mask. And the reason I'm using if you look here, I'm using a white layer and then I'm using a mask is because that way I can just shift between black and white and I can just paint on and off. And that's really neat when you get into this nitty-gritty detail. You can go back and forth easily. You don't have to switch tools or anything. You can just do it. And that way I also have the whole thing is created in grayscale. So masks doesn't have to be necessarily on and off. I use a brush here. I'm using 100% hardness because in this case I want things to be fairly strict, and that way I get a precise mask and I can blur it afterwards in World Machine or TerraGen or View or wherever I want to use it. I can blur it afterwards. This way I would get an accurate coastline that is I can adjust as needed in whatever application, but I get a fixed reference point. And so a lot of work is simply you do this. If you look at the little overview map up there, I can zoom it out so it's easier to see. I take out the big areas using a large brush, and then I move in and do the itty bitty work. And this, for instance, here, so I can simply go up here and I usually find 4 pixels for this type of work is good. And I also have this function here, which means that I'm using a Wacom tablet and a pen to do this, because to do this kind of work with a mouse will be torture. And when I use this, I use the pen pressure for the size, so I can actually get tiny little nooks and crannies, or like small inlets and bays and tiny features along the coast to be shown. So I can kind of work with a 4 pixel brush. I can kind of smooth over or cover a little bit larger areas and still get into the itty bitty gritty details. But that's up to your taste and how you want to do this. But I simply sit and do this. So sometimes I can do this for 3-4 days in a row if I have a large area with stuff. So this is part of a map maker's life, is to, especially when you have reference images that you want to use and you want to touch them up. So this is part of it. So I'm using Lendore Isle as a reference for a first test case for it. So imagine having to do this on the whole Flanese map, that means that's probably about 2 months work and do that. So this is not for the, you need a certain stubbornness, so to speak, to do this kind of work. And it's also perfect to listen to podcasts. You can watch videos, online play or whatever, because you don't require much concentration. If you screw up like this, then you just shift the colors very quickly and you can fill it back in again. That's why I use the mask and black and white paint. And you don't have to be really precise, because once I've done this, I will go in and paint or take away all the shading. That's the next part, because the shadings here are something I created in Bryce back in the day, and in order to make it look like 3D from a top-down view. But in order to make it really 3D, we don't want the shading. So I will make one version where I actually go in and paint over the shading, so it will just be a flat texture, and then use that as the texture in World Machine or View or TerraGen or whatever combination of tools that I will eventually use to recreate the maps in the Flanese in 3D. And the reason I want to do this and not start out from scratch is I want to use the work here as a reference map, because this has become my version of the Flanese, and I want to make sure that any future map is based on this. And the other reason is that this has a sort of in-between scale. When I can do things like I did the last project, and I've also done other things in World Machine where I've done it 1-to-1 scale, meaning 1 kilometer is real, or 1 real mile is 1 virtual mile. And the problem with that is that it requires an enormous amount of data and an enormous amount of work. But this I could probably take a quarter. So 4 virtual miles will be one, or the opposite. Four miles on the Flanese will only be 1 virtual mile. So that means that it will only require 1/4 of the work. And then you can take a small piece of that and detail it if you want to, for instance, detail the Temple of Elemental Evil, or you want a city map or something. You can actually go in and use the terrain from this 3D project and go in and detail and put in extra detail and use a small thing for like 10 square miles or something like that. But this is a short little video showing that what some of my work can look like when I'm not programming in Vue. It's a lot of sitting painting masks, and sometimes the same thing, it will be to paint over the shadows will be a project in itself, and I'll do another video and detailing how that works. Okay, but thank you so much for watching, and I'll hope you tune in for the next video that will come soon.